it's over. It's done. We are finished. Today, we have no room for being optimistic and no room for being happy. So this thing is coming much faster than we thought and much more aggressively than we thought. In the original announcements of this happening a few months ago, this was even announced from Blizzard themselves as to not even be already rolled out in Midnight at the release of Midnight, but it would have taken a bit more time for this to roll out. And even when we heard that, in the best case scenario, we were expecting for something like this new feature going alongside add-ons. So you have Blizzard adding their own version of their add-ons while the add-ons are still rolling out at the same time, and you'll be able to kind of like play alongside each other, play whichever one you wanted before then Blizzard patch after patch continued to improve on their version of add-ons until they were good enough to somewhat kind of pass for a replacement. Instead, with this Q&A announcement for Midnight, we have drastically accelerated the timeline, because in the interview from Ion Azekostas, our game director of WoW, and Crash Reed, which is the UX lead designer of the game, not only is the purge of add-ons, the destruction of your UI, coming in Midnight, it's coming not even on the release of Midnight, it's coming on the pre-patch of Midnight. Presumably some 3 or so months from now this will be going live. Now, with what has been said in this interview, we now have pretty much confirmation of the add-ons being killed. Even the add-on developers themselves are making it quite clear, like Akili, for example, announcing we are done with the release of Midnight. But it's not just Akili, of course. You have Akili dying, you have DBM, you have bigwigs, you have details or any kind of damage meter, you have Plater, you have Cell, Voodoo, Grid, any kind of raid frame or party frame add-on, and then, of course, weak auras. Now, Ion, as a former lawyer himself, obviously starts gaslighting us on the question, are weak auras canned completely? He's gonna say, no, absolutely not, I just want to super clarify there, and then proceeds to super clarify that yes, weak auras are being canned completely. Yes, I guess if you want to be technical, which I guess as a former lawyer is the best kind of correct you want to be, technically correct, yes, you can still use weak auras to show you the list of rares you have to kill for the week. You can still have a weak aura to show you a text reminding you not to rest when you die in a raid, or the weak aura showing you the amount of skill points for your profession you can get for the week. Those weak auras, I guess, can still work. But, you know, when players refer to weak auras, it's pretty much just a reference to combat stuff that you can use weak auras with. And in that sense, yes, weak auras are dead. As Ion says, what they are doing in Midnight, they are focusing on reading combat events and combat states. And now in Midnight, as he says, they are now giving those features secret values. We're gonna be hiding these secret values inside a black box, and now your add-ons won't be able to access this black box. They will be able to tell something is happening in there, for example, a debuff is in that black box, or a buff is in that black box, but they can't tell what it is, or they can't tell what it does, or how long it's gonna last, etc, etc. Which is what is effectively going to kill pretty much all of these add-ons that use these kind of features, reading the API of the game to be able to tell buffs, debuffs, procs, casts, and all of these things. For example, this is what's happening nowadays if you were in a Mythic Plus key. You get into the first pack, you have, like 10 plus mobs all fighting at once. It's pretty messy and crowded. So in this system, for example, you will be able to see things like your frames. You will be able to customize them the way you want. For example, do you want Life Bloom to be a small bar and then Reju to be an overlay? And then which color do you want them? Then you can also track the magical debuff on each player. You can choose whichever of the magical debuffs you want to show, and then you can choose how do you want to display them. You can also then show things like offensive cooldowns, like wings, like coordinated assault, like bestial wrath or Call of the Wild. you can make them show up. You can also show up things like defensives or things like externals, like in this case bark skin. You can make it show up, you can make it glow, you can make them glow here, you can make them glow here and show that they are using a defensive. Of course, you can still keep track of things like interrupts and see who has an interrupt. You can also show the mechanics, like in this case the AoE happening and then the cooldown on the next AoE, as well as the cooldown of one of the more important casts in these pools, which is the Loyal Beast cast. You can also make it visible in here, as well as the incoming cast, the dangerous ones, especially the ones you want to notice, the ones that are being casted on you. Obviously, the warning, the message that you're about to be chunked by a bit in combat, and then of course your nameplates, right? Being able to see, for example, if you want to have visible, if you tag the players in this case with RIP, right? Over something maybe less relevant like Thrash. For example, I care more about RIP than Thrash, so I want RIP to show up here bigger, and I want Thrash to show next to the nameplates. Also, dangerous cooldowns. Like you can choose which of the casts of the enemies you want to show up and then give them a cooldown, so you know when this magical debuff you have to dispel is about to come out. All of this, literally all of this, is not going to be available in the next expansion. This will be essentially, let's just say, censored. Now, Blizzard is expanding their personal resource display and cooldown manager. You can see here, I think this one was from Laxtos, which is a proficient Wikora package maker, testing out the changes in the alpha, and this is basically how your character will look like in this Mythic Plus pack, how your abilities will be looking like, and the buffs or proc effects you can show up, and that's how it will look like in Midnight. The amount of customization is very, very minimal. You are forced to pretty much treat this cooldown manager like your bartender bar add-on. You can only have your bars either in a vertical line, a horizontal line, or a rectangle. You can't do, for example, like I am doing here, like showing my life blooms next to me, or showing things like my clear casting procs next to me, because I consider them more important. I want to see them right next to me rather than under my character. There is no way for you to customize this in the new cooldown manager. Also, the customization for now to your cooldown manager is only a sound. You don't have, like you have right now in Wikoras, you can't even download like 50, 500, 5,000 different sound effects that you want. You also do not have access to things like glows or things like changing the color or the border of certain mechanics. Like I am in this raid, for example, all of these things, like I want to show my temporal compression stacks next to my character, or my time spiral, or my Dream of Ysera next to my character, because they are important buffs. No way for you to show this. The circle showing me how long can I cast while moving. No options for this in your cooldown manager whatsoever. Many players, of course, have voiced their discontent, trying to imagine what they are doing right now, of course, in the future. For example, how do you go in Mythic Plus at high key level and try to play without being able to see something targeting you that's about to do 8 million damage? If you can't see, if you can't have a Wikora, right, telling you that you're being targeted and you're about to be hit. What about interrupts? If you do not have an interrupt list, an interrupt tracker, you can't see who is interrupting or has interrupted what. How are you going to organize without being in voice comm, without being in a group? Another big worry players have had is, of course, healers. Because of this, healers would be the one more damaged, because you have seen yourself, even for example in Race to World Firsts, right? You have even DPS players in that level of play, they just casually drag their raid frames to the corner of their screen because they are a hunter. They don't click their raid frames, they don't care about what's happening to their raid frames, so they can just ignore them. But if you're a healer, you kind of need to pay attention to your raid frames and to what happens to the raid frames. So obviously something like Cell going away and now you being forced to use Blizzard's stock default UI raid frames becomes a bit more challenging. not being able to customize the raid frames the way you want. Now, obviously, this goes hand in hand with the simplification of the content. This is also something that they have been quite vocal about. As Ion says, our intent is that in Midnight, your guild, let's just say they get Hall of Fame. So our intent is that your guild will reach that Hall of Fame level in roughly the same amount of time into the season, with the same amount of time spent, even after all of these changes. So obviously, if you only look at the changes now and the content you are doing now, everything seems massively harder, because trying to do Mythic Dimensius without Wikora, Mythic Dimensius without procs and buffs showing up for your character, or healers trying to heal without being able to see anything, it looks much harder. So Blizzard is saying our plan is that if theoretically Mythic Dimensius was a boss in the next expansion, you would have been able to finish where you have now in the same amount of time that you spent now, because we didn't just get rid of all of the Wikoras, all of the customization of the nameplates and the raid frames, and just kept the bosses as difficult to complete as they are now with Wikoras. We have simplified them so that they wouldn't need as much, you as a raid wouldn't need as much help from Wikoras to be able to clear those raids. And that would work about the same way for Mythic Plus. Let's assume it took you 3 weeks and 90 different keys to be able to reach plus 18s. Next season, it will still take you 3 weeks and, you know, however many keys to reach plus 18s or 19s, even if you don't have Plater, even if you can't see the casts, the incoming casts of the enemies on you, even if you can't see which defensives your players are using, which defensives do they have on cooldown or not, etc, etc. Because we're going to change the dungeons. We're going to perhaps remove the amount of casts of enemies. Perhaps we're going to make these very deadly random bolts which one-shot players, or they one-shot players if they are timed together with an enemy AoE. Now we're gonna make them much less dangerous. We're gonna add way more circles, cleaves, frontals, cones that you have to dodge. So you don't need Wikoras for stuff like that. You have to have hands to move your character to dodge, right? So it won't require as much communication. That is supposedly the plan. You simplify your UI, you get rid of many of the information you had available to you in your UI, but that is also because the enemies are also getting simplified, ideally. And that is where the problem lies. The problem is players don't believe this. Players are not falling for this. They don't believe this will be possible in the next expansion unless it will come up to an absolute extreme. So the extreme that in the next expansion either the raids are going to be impossible, because Blizzard still came up with mechanics that would actually kind of require Wikoras, except you don't have Wikoras anymore, so you have to do them raw, you have to raw dog them, and it comes out being much harder, or the complete opposite. Blizzard comes up with mechanics they think will make you take as much time as the 250 pulls you took to kill Dimensius, except turns out players can spread and dodge and move and stack much better than Blizzard thought. So having to defeat bosses like Dimensius or bosses like Nexus King without these kind of Wikora necessary mechanics turns the raid into a Emerald Nightmare 70 pull raid kind of difficulty. Many players are skeptical about Blizzard being able to find a comfortable between these two extremes. What is also making players even more worried is the fact that there is very little testing time. Yes, technically, if you want to use the glass half full theory, we get the pre-patch. At the very least, this isn't launching on release of the expansion. Usually the pre-patch is like a month before the expansion, so at least you have about a month before the expansion. And also, as they have pointed out, actually they will be retooling Manaforge Omega to be like a raid in the next expansion. So you get rid of all of the add-ons. You kill all of these weak auras and sell and buff and debuff trackers in the pre-patch. Your characters also, as we will see in another video, will be significantly simplified in the way they play, but at least you get to test them in also a simplified Manaforge Omega. So that will be a good test. That will be a good test to see what exactly does Blizzard mean with, simplifying both your UI and your characters, pruning a bunch of abilities, a bunch of mechanics from your characters to make them simpler, alongside your UI being much more Blizzard dependent rather than add-on dependent, now that in the pre-patch you will get to test it in Manaforge Omega, updated for the next expansion. Even then though, there is still the skepticism of how quickly is this happening. The fact that this isn't rolling out bit by bit, it isn't rolling out patch by patch. As I said, perhaps the most neutral, the most peaceful way would have been to roll this out while add-ons were still working, and then encourage players to test this Blizzard UI, stock UI, so that they give feedback, and then in patch 12.1, season 2, or even 12.2, season 3, they roll out the full swap where they kill the add-ons. Instead, they make them come out immediately. So pretty much the only testing time will be the last few phases of the alpha or even the beta, where Mythic Plus and the raid will be available. So you get to have a feel exactly of how that plays out without basically most of the combat add-ons and the pre-patch. That's the only time you will have before you are thrown into the live version of Midnight, and then at that point there is no more testing. At that point the raid is coming out, Mythic Plus is coming out, you gotta play, and you have to play with what you have. But there is just, in general, skepticism about Blizzard being able to make this work. After all, you already have a track record of this. For example, in this expansion, as we will go over in a couple of days, the 6th time in 3 expansions, Blizzard is announcing they want to make healers be less powerful. They want to make healers be able to top health bar in less time, so they are reworking healers. That's the 6th time in 3 expansions they are saying this. So clearly the 5 previous times it hasn't worked. Because we are here, me and the plane flying behind me, trying to do this for a 6th time in 3 expansions, almost 4 expansions now. So, thinking that this entire massive overhaul of pretty much gameplay, because add-ons, as Blizzard is pointing out, will impact the gameplay. It has been one of the biggest lamentations of Blizzard. They claim that they are not able to develop bosses the way they want, or they have been restricted in developing bosses, mechanics, even trash mobs in Mythic Plus, etc., the way they wanted, because they have to keep in mind weak auras exist. Even if we think, oh, this can be kind of hard, we can make the players do this and this and that, and then they remember, oh shit, they have weak auras to help. And suddenly the difficulty level goes down a lot because there are weak auras, right? So that is also going to be impacting the way Blizzard develops mechanics. So now they would have no excuses. They have been complaining about weak auras, stifling their development process for years. Now this will be an expansion where there will be no excuse. You won't have the excuse that Plater, that weak auras, that Cell, that DBM or bigwigs are making things easier, so you have to constantly ramp up the difficulty or make mechanics more and more convoluted, so to make them more challenging. Now you have none of that. You just got rid of all of it. You are only keeping a few of these features in your stock default UI. For example, the boss mods, bigwigs, is going to be in the default UI of WoW now. They are calling it the boss warnings. That will be in the new interface. Of course, they won't be anywhere near customizable, as much customizable as your boss mods currently are, but at least you will have timers of boss mechanics in your UI. But besides that, pretty much all of the other mechanics will be naked. They will be open for Blizzard to developing, because they won't have to have and keep in mind the fact that the mechanic itself can be weakened, can be simplified by something like a weak aura. So we will see how this will play out, not even in Midnight, but even just in the pre-patch. But for now, pessimism and distrust, I think, would be the two adjectives to describe this move from Blizzard, both in the general sense of us losing what we have carefully kept, watered, grown, and see the fruits of our labor, like tailoring our weak auras and our UI the way we wanted, going completely up in flames, as well as what this could mean for the gameplay itself, having to actually play all of these mechanics without seeing certain things for now, and for years you have been able to see. So it's not looking to be very good. It's quite a dangerous risk for Blizzard to launch an expansion with this, so not come up with this mid-season, not come up with this, for example, if there was one reason to have another fated season in this expansion, you know, to extend this expansion by another 6 months instead of making this a very short 18 months long expansion, this could have been a good reason. Release fated season 4 with all of these changes, and then have season 4 to plan, add, fix, polish all of your stock Blizzard UI changes for the next expansion, rather than straight up launching the next expansion with all of these changes going live and all of the add-ons dying. So that's where we are right now, depressed when it comes to the mood for the next expansion based on these changes. We will see, of course, how this will play out in the alpha of Midnight, in the beta of Midnight, and eventually also the pre-patch of Midnight itself. But for now though, on this Thursday, this is time to leave each other. We're starting the goodbyes as usual by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who has been supporting Competi for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, man, my cell, all of my raid frame setups for like 5 different healers going away forever.